be reading William Gibson's Virtual Light, the first of 3 in the Bridge trilogy. Chapter 1. The Luminous Flesh of Giants. The courier presses his forehead against layers of glass argon, high-impact plastic. He watches a gunship traverse the city's middle distance like a hunting wasp, death slung beneath its thorax in a smooth black pod. Hours earlier, missiles have fallen in a northern suburb, 73 dead, the kill as yet unclaimed. But here, the mirrored ziggurats laid down Lazaro Cardenas flow with the luminous flesh of giants, shunting out the night's barrage of dreams to the waiting avenidas, business as usual, world without end. The air beyond the window touches each source of light with a faint hepatic corona, a tint of jaundice edging imperceptibly into brownish translucence. Fine, dry flakes of fecal snow, billowing in from the sewage flats, have lodged in the lens of night. Closing his eyes, he centers himself in the background of his climate control. He imagines himself in Tokyo, this room in some new wing of the old Imperial. He sees himself in the streets of Chiyodaku, beneath the sighing trains. Red paper lanterns line a narrow lane. He opens his eyes. Mexico City is still there. The 8 empty bottles, plastic miniatures, are carefully aligned with the edge of the coffee table. A Japanese vodka. Come back salmon, its name more irritating than its lingering aftertaste. On the screen above the console, the Pachitka await him, all in a creamy freeze. When he takes up the remote, their high, sharp cheekbones twist in the space behind his eyes. They're young men, invariably entering from behind, wearing black leather gloves, Slavic faces calling up from unwanted fragments of childhood. The reek of a black canal, steel racketing steel beneath a swaying train, the high old ceilings of an apartment overlooking a frozen park. 28 peripheral images frame the Russians in their earnest coupling. He glimpses figurines carried from the smoke-blacked card deck of an Asian ferry. He opens another of the little bottles. Now the Pachitka, their heads bobbing like well-oiled machines, swallow their arrogant, self-absorbed boyfriends. Camera angles recall the ardor of Soviet industrial cinema. His gaze strays to the NHK weather. A low-pressure front is crossing Kansas. Next to it, an eerie calm Islamic downlink ceaselessly reiterates the name of God in a fractal-based calligraphy. He drinks the vodka. He watches television. After midnight, at the intersection of Liverpool and Florence, he stares out at Zona Rosa from the back of a white Lada, a nanopore Swiss respirator chafing his freshly shaven chin. And every passing face is masked, mouths and nostrils concealed behind filters. Some, honoring the Day of the Dead, resemble the silver-beaded jaws of grinning sugar skulls. Whatever form they take, their manufacturers all make the same dubious, obliquely comforting claims about viroids. He's thought to escape the sameness, perhaps discover something of beauty or passing interest, but here there are only masked faces, his fear, the lights. An ancient American car comes creeping through the turn out of Avenida Chapultepec. Gouts of carbon pulsing from beneath a dangling bumper. A dusty rind of cola-colored resin and shattered mirror seals its every surface. The windshield is exposed, and this black and glossy opaque as a blob of ink, reminding him of the gunship's lethal pod. He feels the fear begin to accrete seamlessly, senselessly, with absolute conviction around this carnival ghost, the Cadillac, this oil-burning relic in its spectral robe of smudged mosaic silver. Why is it allowed to add its filth to the already impossible air? Who sits inside behind the black windshield? Trembling, he watches the thing pass. That car. He finds himself leaning forward, compulsively addressing the broad brown neck of the driver, whose massive earlobes somehow recall reproduction pottery offered on the hotel's shopping channel. El coche, says the driver, who wears no mask, and turning now seems to notice the courier for the first time. The courier sees the mirrored Cadillac flare once and briefly with the reflected ruby of the nightclub's laser, then gone. The driver is staring at him. He tells the driver to return to the hotel. He comes awake from a dream of metal voices down the vaulted concourses of some European airport, distant figures glimpsed in muted rituals of departure, darkness, this hiss of climate control, the touches of cotton sheets, his telephone beneath the pillow, sounds of traffic muted by the gas-filled windows. All tension, his panic, are gone. He remembers the atrium bar, music, faces. He becomes aware of an inner balance, a rare equilibrium. It is all he knows of peace. And, yes, the glasses are here, tucked behind his telephone. He draws them out, opening the earpieces with a guilty pleasure that is somehow endured since Prague. Very nearly a decade he has loved her, though he doesn't think of it in those terms. But he has never brought another piece of software, and the black plastic frames have started to lose their sheen. The label on the cassette is unreadable now, suede white with his touch in the night. So many rooms like this one. He has long since come to prefer her in silence. He no longer inserts the yellowing ear beads. He has learned to provision his own, whispering to her as he fast-forwards through the clumsy titles and up to the moonlit ragged hillscape of a place that is neither Hollywood nor Rio, but some soft-focus digital approximation of both. She is waiting for him, always in the white house up the canyon road. The candles, the wine, the jet-beaded dress against the matte perfection of her skin, such whiteness, the black beads drawn smooth, and the cool as a snake's belly up her tensed thigh. Far away beneath cotton sheets his hands move. Later, drifting towards a sleep of a different texture, the phone beneath his pillow chimes softly, and only once. Yes. Confirming your reservations to San Francisco, someone says, either a woman or a machine. He touches a key, recording the flight number, says goodnight, and closes his eyes on the tenuous light, sifting from the dark borders of the drapes. Her white arms enfold him, her blondness eternal. He sleeps. How we doing so far? Make sure everything with the mic is cool and there's no craziness going on. Cruising with the gunhead. Hinton Secure had their wagons detailed every 3 shifts. They used this big specialty car wash off Colby, 20 coats of hand-rubbed wet honey sienna, and you didn't let it get too shabby. That one November evening, the Republic of Desire put an end to his career in armed response. Barry Rydell had arrived there a little early. Angle the mic a little this way. He liked the way it smelled inside. They had this pink stuff they put down the power washers to get the road film off. The smell reminded him of a summer job he'd had in Knoxville his last year in school. They'd been putting condos into the shell of this big old Safeway out in Jefferson Davis. The architects wanted the cinder block walls stripped just this one certain way, mostly gray showing through, but with some pink Safeway paint left in the little dips and crannies. They were from Memphis, and they wore black suits and white cotton shirts. Shirts had obviously cost more than the suits, or at least as much, and they never wore ties or undid the top button. Rydell figured that was a way for architects to dress. Now he lived in L.A. He knew it was true. He overheard one of them explaining to the foreman that they were doing was exposing the integrity of the material's passage through time. He thought that was probably bullshit, but he sort of liked the sound of it anyway. Like what happened to old people on television. But what it really amounted to was getting most of the shitty old paint off thousands and thousands of square feet of equally shitty cinder block. And you did it with an oscillating spray head on the end of a long stainless handle. If you thought the foreman wasn't looking, you could aim it at another kid, twist out a 30-foot rooster tail of stringing rainbow, and wash all his sunblock off. Rydell and his friends wore this Australian stuff that came in serious colors, so you could see where you had and hadn't put it. You had to get your right distance on it, though, because up close those heads could take the chrome off a bumper. Rydell and Buggy Craig both got fired for doing that. Finally. And then they walked across Jeff Davis to a beer joint, and Rydell wound up spending the night with this girl from Key West. First time he'd ever slept beside a woman. Now here he was in Los Angeles, driving a 6-wheeled Hotspur Hussar with 20 coats of hand-rubbed lacquer. The Hussar was an armored Land Rover that could do 140 on a straightaway, assuming you could find one open and have the time to accelerate. Hernandez, his super, said you couldn't trust an Englishman to build anything much bigger than a hat. Not if you wanted it to work and you needed it. He said an intern secure should have bought Israeli, or at least Brazilian, and who needed Ralph Lauren to design a tank anyway? Rydell didn't know about that, but the paint job was definitely trying too hard. He thought they probably wanted people to think of those big brown United parcel trucks, and at the same time maybe hoped it would look sort of something like you'd see an Episcopal church. Not too much gilt on the logo, sort of restrained. The people who worked in the car wash were mostly Mongolian immigrants, recent ones who had trouble getting better jobs. They did this crazy throat-singing thing while they worked, and he liked to hear that. He couldn't figure out how they did it. It sounded like tree frogs, but like it was two sounds at once. Now they were buffing out rows of chromed nubs down the sides. They had those had been meant to support electric crowd control grids, and were just chromed for the looks. The riot wagons in Knoxville had been electrified, but with this drip system that kept them wet, which was a lot nastier. "Sign here," said the crew boss, this quiet black kid named Anderson. He was a medical student, days, and he always looked like he was about 2 nights short of sleep. Rydell took the pad and the light pen and signed the signature plate. Anderson handed Rydell the keys. "You ought to get you some rest," Rydell said. Anderson grinned, wanly. Rydell walked over to Gunhead, deactivating the door alarm. Somebody had written that inside. Gunhead, in a green marker on the panel above the windshield. The name stuck, but mostly because Sublet liked it. Sublet was a Texan, a refugee from some weird trailer camp video sect. He said his mother had been getting ready to deed his ass to the church, whatever that meant. Sublet wasn't too anxious to talk about it, but Rydell had gotten the idea that these people figured video was the Lord's preferred means of communicating. The screen itself a kind of perpetually burning bush. "He's in the details," Sublet once said. "You gotta watch for him close." Whatever form this worship had taken, it was evident that Sublet had absorbed more television than anyone Rydell had ever met. Mostly old movies on channels that never ran anything but. Sublet and Gunhead was the name of the robot tank in a Japanese monster movie. Hernandez thought Sublet had written the name on there himself. Sublet denied it. Hernandez said take it off. Sublet ignored him. It was still there, but Rydell knew Sublet was too law-abiding to commit any vandalism. And anyway, the ink in the marker might have killed him. Sublet had bad allergies. He went into shock from various kinds of cleaners and solvents, so you couldn't get him to come into the car wash at all, ever. The allergies made him light-sensitive, too, so he had to wear these mirrored contacts. With the black Insecure uniform and his dry blonde hair, the contacts made him look like some kind of Klan-ass Nazi robot, which could get kind of complicated in the wrong store on Sunset, say 3 in the morning, and all you really wanted was some mineral water and a Coke, but Rydell always glad to have him on shift because he was adamantly non-violent, a rent-a-cop as you were likely to find, and he probably wasn't even crazy, both of which were definite pluses for Rydell. As Hernandez was fond of pointing out, SoCal had stricter regulations for who could or couldn't be a hairdresser. Like Rydell, a lot of Insecure's response people were former police officers of some kind. Some were even ex-LAPD. And if the company's rules about not carrying personal weapons on duty were any indication, his co-workers were expected to turn up packing all manner of hardware. There were metal detectors on staff room doors, and Hernandez usually had a drawer full of push daggers, nunchucks, stun guns, knucks, boot knives, and whatever else the detectors had picked up. Like Friday morning at South Miami High School, Hernandez gave it all back after the shift. But when they went calling, they were supposed to make do with their Glocks and the chunkers. The Glocks were standard police issue, at least 20 years old, the Insecure bought by the truckload from PDs that could afford to upgrade to caseless ammunition. If you did it by the book, you kept the Glocks in their plastic holsters, and kept the holsters velcroed to the wagon central console. When you answered a call, you pulled a holstered pistol off the console and stuck it on the patch provided on your uniform. It was the only time you were supposed to be out of the wagon with a gun on, when you were actually responding. The chunkers weren't even guns, not legally anyway, but a 10-second burst at close range would chew somebody's face off. They were Israeli riot control devices, air-powered, that fired 1-inch cubes of recycled rubber. They looked like the result of a forced union between a bullpup assault rifle and an industrial staple gun, except they were made out of this bright yellow plastic. When you pulled the trigger, those chunks came out in a solid stream. If you got really good with that one, you could shoot around corners, just kind of bounce them off convenient surface. Up close, they'd eventually cut a sheet of plywood in half. If you kept on shooting, they left major bruises about 30 yards. Theory was you didn't always encounter that many armed intruders, and a chunker was a lot less likely to injure the client or the client's property if you did. If you encountered an armed intruder, you had the Glock. Although the intruder was probably running, caseless, through a floating breach, not part of the theory. Nor was it part of the theory that seriously tooled-up intruders tended to be tightened on Dancer, and were thereby both inhumanly fast and clinically psychotic. There had been a lot of Dancer in Knoxville, and some of it had gotten Rydell suspended. He'd crawled into an apartment where a machinist named Kenneth Turvey was holding his girlfriend, 2 little kids, and demanding to speak to the president. Turvey was white, skinny, hadn't bathed in a month, and had the Last Supper tattooed on his chest. It was a very fresh tattoo. It hadn't even scabbed over. Through a film of drying blood, Rydell could see that Jesus didn't even have a face. Neither did any of the apostles. Damn it, Turvey said when he saw Rydell. I just want to speak to the president. He was sitting cross-legged, naked, on his girlfriend's couch. He had something like a piece of pipe across his lap, all wrapped with tape. We're trying to get her for you, Rydell said. We're sorry it's taking so long, but we have to go through channels. God damn it, Turvey said wearily. Doesn't nobody understand I'm on a mission from God? He didn't sound particularly angry, just tired and put out. Rydell could see the girlfriend through an open door of the apartment's single bedroom. She was on her back on the floor, and one of her legs looked broken. He couldn't see her face. She wasn't moving at all. Where were the kids? What's that thing you got there? Rydell asked, indicating the object across Turvey's lap. It's a gun, Turvey said, and it's why I gotta talk to the president. Never seen a gun like that, Rydell allowed. What's it shoot? Grapefruit cans, Turvey said. Full of concrete? No shit. Watch, Turvey said, brought the thing to his shoulder. It had a sort of breech, very intricately machined. A trigger thing like part of a pair of vice grip pliers and a couple of flexible tubes. The latter ran down, Rydell saw, to a great big canister of gas, the kind you'd need a hand truck to move, which lay on the floor beside the couch. There, on his knees, on the girlfriend's dusty polyester carpet, he'd watched that muzzle thing swing past. It was big enough to put your fist down. He'd watched as Turvey took aim back through the open bedroom door at the closet. Turvey, he heard himself say, where's the goddamn kids? Turvey moved the vice grip handle and punched a hole the size of a fruit juice can through the closet door. The kids were in there. They must have screamed through. Rydell couldn't remember hearing it. Rydell's lawyer later argued that he was not only deaf at this point, but in a state of sonically induced catalepsy. Turvey's invention was only a few decibels short of what you got with a SWAT stun grenade, but Rydell couldn't remember. He couldn't remember shooting Kenneth Turvey in the head, either, or anything else until he woke up in the hospital. There was a woman there from Cops in Trouble, which had been Rydell's father's favorite show, but she said she couldn't actually talk to him until she'd spoken with his agent. Rydell said he didn't have one. She said she knew that, but was going to call him. Rydell lay there thinking about all the times he and his father had watched Cops in Trouble. What kind of trouble are we talking here? He finally asked. The woman just smiled. Whatever, Barry. It'll probably be adequate. He squinted up at her. She was sort of good-looking. What's your name? Karen Mendelsohn. She didn't look like she was from Knoxville or even Memphis. You from Cops in Trouble? Yes. What do you do for 'em? I'm a lawyer, she said. Rydell couldn't recall ever actually having met one before, but after that he wound up meeting lots more. Gunheads' displays were featureless slabs of liquid crystals. They woke when Rydell inserted the key, typed the security code, and ran a basic systems check. The camera under the rear bumper were his favorites. They made parking really easy. You could see exactly where you were backing up. The downlink from the Death Star wouldn't work while he was still in the car wash. Too much steel in the building. But it was Sublet's job to keep track of all that with an earbeat. There was a notice posted in the staff room at Inton Secure telling you it was company policy not to call it that, the Death Star. But everyone did anyway. The LAPD called it that themselves. Officially, it was the Southern California Geosynchronal Law Enforcement Satellite. Watching the dashboard screens, Rydell backed carelessly out of the building. Gunhead's twin ceramic engines were new enough to still be relatively quiet. Rydell could hear the tires squish over wet concrete floor. Sublet was waiting outside, his silver eyes reflecting the red of passing taillights. Behind him, the sun was setting, the sky's colors besetting more than the usual cocktail of additives. He stepped back as Rydell reversed past him. anxious to avoid the least droplet of spray from the tires. Rydell was anxious too. He didn't want to have to haul the Texan to Cedars again to see if his allergies kicked up. Rydell waited as Sublet pulled on a pair of disposable surgical gloves. "Howdy," Sublet said, climbing into his seat. He closed his door and began to remove the gloves, gingerly peeling them into a Ziploc baggie. "Don't get any on you," Rydell said, watching with care which Sublet treated the gloves. "Go ahead and laugh," Sublet said mildly. He took out a pair of hypoallergenic gum and popped a piece from its bubble. "How's old Gunhead?" Rydell scanned the displays, satisfied. "Not too shabby." "Hope we didn't have to respond to any damn stealth houses tonight," Sublet said, chewing. Stealth houses, so-called, were on Sublet's personal list of bad calls. Said the air in them was toxic. Rydell didn't think it made any sense, but he was tired of arguing about it. Stealth houses were bigger than most regular houses, cost more, and Rydell figured the owners would pay plenty to keep their air clean. Sublet maintained that anybody who built a stealth house was paranoid to begin with, would always keep the place locked up too tight, no air circulation, and you'd get bad toxic buildup. If there'd been any stealth houses in Knoxville, Rydell hadn't known about them. He thought it was an L.A. thing. Sublet, who worked for Inton Secure for almost 2 years, mostly on day patrol in Venice, had been the first person to mention them to Rydell. When Rydell finally got to answer to call to one, he couldn't believe the place. It just went down and down, dug in beneath something that looked almost, but not quite, like a bombed-out dry-cleaning plant. It was all peeled logs inside, white plaster, Turkish carpets, big paintings, slate floors, furniture like he'd never seen before. It was some kind of tricky call, domestic violence, Rydell figured. The husband hit the wife hit the button, and now they were making out. It was all just a glitch. But it couldn't really be a glitch because someone had to hit the button, and there hadn't been any response to the password call that came back to them 3.8 seconds later. She must have messed with the phones, Rydell thought. Then hit the button. He'd been riding with Big George Kinchakamadze that night. The Georgian, Tbilisi, not Atlanta, hadn't liked it either. "You see these people? They're subscribers, man. Nobody bleeding. You get your ass out, okay?" Big George had said after. But Rydell kept remembering a tension around the woman's eyes, how she held the collar of the big white robe folded against her throat. Her husband in a matching robe, but with thick, hairy legs and expensive glasses. There'd been something wrong there, but he'd never known what. Not any more than he'd ever understand how their lives really worked. Lives that looked like what you saw on TV, but weren't. L.A. was full of mysteries when you looked at it that way. No bottom to it. He'd come to like driving through it, though. Not when he had to get anywhere in particular, but just cruising with Gunhead was okay. Now he was turning into L.A. Cienega, and the little green cursor on the dash was doing the same. "Forbidden Zone," Sublet said. "Hervé Villechese, Susan Tyrell, Marie Pascal Elfman, Viva." "Viva?" Rydell asked. "Viva what?" "Viva. Actress." "When they make that?" 1980. I wasn't born yet. "Time on TV is all the same time, Rydell." "Man, I thought you were trying to get over your upbringing and all." Rydell demirrored the door window to better watch a redhead girl pass him on a pink Daihatsu sneaker with the top off. Anyway, I never saw that one. It was just about an hour of evening when women in cars looked about as good in Los Angeles as anything ever did. The Surgeon General was trying to outlaw convertibles, said they contributed to the skin cancer rate. Endgame. Al Kleiber, Meor Chan, George Eastman, Gordon Mitchell, 1985. "Well, I was 2, Rydell said, but I didn't see that one either." Sublet fell silent. Rydell felt sorry for him. The Texan didn't know any other way to start a conversation, and his folks back home in the trailer camp would have seen all those films and more. Well, Rydell said, trying to pick up on his end. I was watching this one old movie last night. Sublett perked up. Which one? Dunno, Rydell said. This guy's in L.A. and he's just met this girl. Then he picks up a payphone, 'cause it's ringing. Late at night, it's some guy in a missile silo somewhere. Who knows? They've just launched theirs at the Russians. He's trying to phone his dad or his brother or something. Says the world's gonna end in short order. And the guy who's answered the phone hears these soldiers come in and shoot the guy. The guy on the phone, I mean. Sublett closed his eyes, scanning the inner trivia banks. Yeah, how's it end? Dunno, Rydell said. Went to sleep. Sublett opened his eyes. Who's in it? Got me. Sublett's blank silver eyes widened in disbelief. Jesus, Barry. You shoulda oughta watch TV, not unless you're gonna pay attention to it. He wasn't in the hospital very long after he shot Kenneth Turvey, barely 2 days. His lawyer, Aaron Persley, himself made the case that they should have kept him in there longer, the better to assess the extent of his post-traumatic shock. But Rydell hated hospitals, and anyway, he didn't feel too bad. He just couldn't recall exactly what happened. And he had Karen Mendelsohn to help him out with those things. And his new agent, Wellington Ma, to deal with the other people from Cops in Trouble. Not one of them was as nice as Karen, who had long brown hair. Wellington Ma was Chinese, lived in Los Angeles, and Karen said his father had been in the Big Circle gang, though she advised Rydell not to bring it up. Wellington Ma's business card was a rectangular slice of pink synthetic quartz, laser engraved with his name, the Ma Marino Agency, an address on Beverly Boulevard, and all kinds of numbers and email addresses. It arrived by Globex in its own little gray suede envelope, while Rydell was still in the hospital. Looks like you could cut yourself on it, Rydell said. You could. Many no doubt have, said Karen Mendelsohn. And if you put it in your wallet and sit down, it shatters. What's the point of it? You're supposed to take very good care of it. You won't get another. Rydell never actually did meet Wellington Ma, at least not till quite later. Karen would bring in a little briefcase with a pair of iPhones on a wire, and Rydell could talk to him in his office in L.A. It was the sharpest telephone presence rig Rydell ever used, and he really did look like he was just right there. You could see out the window to where there was this lopsided pyramid, the color of Noxzema jar. He asked Wellington Ma what that was. Ma said it was the old design center, but currently it was a discount mall. Rydell could go there when he came to L.A., which was going to be soon. Turvey's girlfriend, Janae Ray Klein, was bringing an intricately interlocking set of separate actions against Rydell, the department, the city of Knoxville, and the company in Singapore that owned her apartment building. About $20 million in total. Rydell, having become a cop in trouble, was glad to find that Cops in Trouble was right there for him. They'd hired Aaron Persley, for starters, and of course Rydell knew he was from the show. He had that gray hair and those blue eyes, that nose you could split kindling with, and wore jeans, Tony Lama boots, and plain white Oxford cloth Pima cotton cowboy business shirts with Navajo silver bolo ties. He was famous, and he defended cops like Rydell from people like Turvey's girlfriend and her lawyer. Jenny Ray, Klein's lawyer, maintained that Rydell shouldn't have been in her apartment at all, that he endangered her life and her children's by so doing, and that he'd killed Kenneth Turvey in the process. Mr. Turvey being described as a skilled craftsman, a steady worker, and a loving father figure for little Rambo and Kelly, a born-again Christian, a recovering addict to 4-thiobruscoline, and the family's sole means of support. Recovering? Rydell asked Karen Mendelsohn. Mendelsohn in his own room in the airport executive suites. She's just shown him the facts from Jenny Ray's lawyer. Apparently, he'd been in a meeting that very day, Karen said. What did he do there? Rydell asked, remembering the Last Supper and the drawing blood. According to our witnesses, he openly horned a tablespoon of his substance of choice, took the podium by force, and delivered a 30-minute rant on President Milbank's pantyhose and the assumed current state of her genitalia. He then exposed himself, masturbated but did not ejaculate, and left the basement of the First Baptist Church. Jesus, Rydell said. And this was at one of those drug meetings, like AA? It was, Karen Mendelsohn said, though apparently Turvey's performance has triggered an unfortunate sequence of relapses. We'll send in a team of counselors, of course, to work with those who were at the meetings. That's nice, Rydell said. Looks good in court, she said, in the unlikely event that we ever get there. He wasn't recovering, Rydell said. Hadn't even recovered from the last bunch he jammed up his nose. Apparently true, she said. But he was also a member of an Adult Survivors of Satanism. They are starting to take an interest in this case. Therefore, Mr. Pursley and Mr. Ma feel it best we coast it, but soon. Barry, you and me. Well, what about the court stuff? You're on suspension from the department. You haven't been charged with anything yet, and your lawyer's name is Aaron with 2 A's Pursley. But you're out of here, Barry. To L.A.? None other. Rydell looked at her and thought about Los Angeles on television. Will I like it? At first, she said. At first it'll probably like you. I know I do. Which was how he wound up going to bed with a lawyer, one who smelled like $1 million. Talked dirty and slid all around. Wore underwear from Milan, which was in Italy. The Kill Fix, Serinda Burdett, Gundren Weaver, Dean Mitchell, Shinobu Sakimaki, 1997. Never saw it, Rydell said, sucking the last of his grand decaf cold Kappa with an extra shot from the milky ice at the bottom of his plastic thermos cup. Mama saw Sandra Burdett in this mall over by Waco. Got her autograph, too. Kept on the set with the prayers hankies and her hologram, the Reverend Wayne Fallon. She had a prayer hanky for every damn thing. One for the rent, one to keep the AIDS off, TB. Yeah, how'd she use them? She kept them on the top of her set, Subbit explained. The finished ink of quadruple distilled water left in the skinny translucent bottle. There was only one place along this part of Sunset sold the stuff, but Rydell didn't mind. It was next to the takeout coffee bar. They could park in the lot on the corner. The fellow who ran the lot always seemed kind of glad to see them. Prayer hanky won't keep the AIDS off, Rydell said. Get yourself vaccinated like anybody else can. Get your mama vaccinated too. Though the demirrored window, Rydell could see the street shine to J.D. Shapley, up against the concrete wall that was all that was left of the building that had stood there once. You saw a lot of them in West Hollywood. Somebody had sprayed, "Shapley was a cock-sucking faggot," in bright pink paint. The letters 3 feet high, and then a big pink heart. Below that, stuck to the wall, were postcards of Shapley, and photographs of people who must have died. God only knows how many millions had. On the pavement at the base of the wall, they were dead flowers, stubs of candles, other stuff. Something about the postcards gave Rydell the creeps. They made the guy look like a cross between Elvis and some sort of Catholic saint, skinny with his eyes too big. He turns to Sublet. Man, you still haven't gotten yourself vaccinated yet. You got nothing but stone white trash ignorance to thank for it. Sublet cringed. That's worse than live vaccine, man. That's the whole mother disease right there. Sure is, Rydell said, but it doesn't do anything to you.
There's still plenty of old kind walking around here. They ought to make it compulsory, you ask me. Sublet shuddered. Reverend Fallon always said, "Screw Reverend Fallon," Rydell said, hitting the ignition. "Son of a bitch just makes money selling prayer hankings to people like your mama. You knew what was all bullshit anyway, didn't you? Otherwise, why'd you come out here?"
He put Gunhead into gear and eased over into sunset traffic. One thing about driving a Hotspur Hussar, people always let you cut in. Sublet's head seemed to draw down between his high shoulders, giving him the look of a worried, steel-eyed buzzard. "Ain't all that simple," he said. "It's everything I've been brought up to be. Can't all be bullshit, can it?" Rydell, glancing over him, took pity. "Nah," he said. "I guess it wouldn't have to be necessarily all bullshit. But it's just what they bring you up to be, Barry." Rydell had to think about it. "Republican," he said finally. Karen Mendelsohn had seemed like the best of a whole string of things Rydell felt he could get used to just fine. Like flying business class or having a SoCal Ameribank card from Cops in Trouble. First time with her in the executive suites in Knoxville, not having anything with him, he tried to show her his certificates of vaccination, required by the department, else they couldn't get you insured. She just laughed and said German nanotech would take care of all that. Then she showed Rydell this thing through the transparent top of a gadget like a battery-powered pressure cooker. Rydell had heard about them, but he had never seen one. He'd also heard they cost about as much as a small car. He'd read somewhere how they always had to be kept at body temperature. It looked like it might be moving a little in there. Pale sort of jellyfish thing. He asked her if it was true they were alive. She told him it wasn't, exactly, but it was almost, and the rest of it was just buckyballs and subcellular automata. And he wouldn't even know it was there, but no way she was going to put it in front of him. She'd gone to the bathroom to do that. When she came back out in that underwear, he got to learn where Milan was. And while it was true, he wouldn't have known the thing was there. He did know it was there. But pretty soon, he forgot about it. Almost. They chartered a tilt rotor to Memphis the next morning and got on Air Magellan to LAX. Business class, mostly. Meant better gizmos in the seat back front of you. And Rydell's immediate favorite was a telepresence set you could turn to servo-mounted mollies on the outside of the plane. Karen hated to use the little Virtufax she carried around in her purse, so she'd gotten on to her office in L.A. and had them download her morning's mail into her seatback display. She got down to that fast, talking on the phone, sending faxes, and leaving Rydell to ooh and ah at the views from the mollies. The seats were bigger than when he used to fly down to Florida to see his father. The food was better, and the drinks were free. Rydell had 3 or 4 of those, fell asleep, and didn't wake up until somewhere over Arizona. The air was funny at LAX, and the light was different. California was a lot more crowded than he'd expected, and louder. There was a man there from Cops in Trouble holding up a piece of wrinkled white cardboard that said Mendelsohn in red marker, only the S was backward. Rydell smiled, introduced himself, and shook hands with him. He seemed to like that, and said his name was Sergey. When Karen asked him where the fucking car was, he turned bright red and said it would just take him a minute to get it. Karen said no thanks, they'd walk to the lot with him as soon as their bags turned up. No way was she waiting around in a zoo like this. Sergey nodded. He kept trying to fold up the sign and put it into his jacket pocket, but it was too big. Rydell wondered why she'd suddenly gotten bitchy like that. Tired from the trip, maybe. He winked at Sergey, but that just seemed to make the guy more nervous. After their bags came, Karen's 2 black leather ones and the soft-side blue Samsonite Rydell had brought with his new debit card. He and Sergey carried them out across the kind of traffic loop.
The air outside was the same, but hotter. This recording kept saying that white spaces were for loading and unloading only. There were all kinds of cars jockeying around, babies crying, people leaning on piles of luggage, but Sergei knew where they were going, over to this garage across the way. Sergei's car was long, black, German, and looked like somebody had just cleaned it all over with warm spit and Q-tips. When Rydell offered to ride shotgun, Sergei got quite rattled again and hustled him into the back seat with Karen, which made her laugh, so Rydell felt better. As they were pulling out of the garage, Rydell spotted two cops over by these big stainless steel letters that said Metro. They wore air-conditioned helmets with clear plastic visors. They were poking at an old man with their sticks, though it didn't look like they had them turned on. The old man's jeans were out at the knees, and he had big patches of tape on both cheekbones, which always means cancer. He was so burned it was hard to tell if he was white or what. A crowd of people was streaming up the stairs behind the old man and cops under the Metro sign and stepping around them. Welcome to Los Angeles, she said. Be glad you aren't taking the subway. They had dinner that night. Karen said in what Karen said was Hollywood, with Aaron Pursley himself, in a Tex-Mex restaurant on the North Florist Street. It was the best Tex-Mex food Rydell ever had. About a month later, he tried to take Sublet there for his birthday, maybe cheer him up with a down-home meal, but the man out front just wouldn't let them in. Full up, he said. Rydell could see plenty of empty tables through the window. It was early there, and there was hardly anybody. How about those? Rydell said, pointing at all the empty tables. Reserved, the man said. Sublet said spicy foods weren't really such a good idea for him anyway. What he'd come to like best, cruising with Gunhead, was getting back up in the hills and canyons, particularly on a night with a good moon. Sometimes you saw things up there and couldn't quite be sure you'd seen them or not. One full moon night, Rydell had slung Gunhead around a curve and frozen a naked woman in the headlights, the way a deer'll stop trembling on a country road. Just a second she was there, long enough for Rydell to think he'd seen that. She either wore silver horns or some kind of hat with an upturned crescent, and that she might have been Japanese, which struck him right as the weirdest thing about any of it. Then she saw him, and he saw her see him, and she smiled. Then she was gone. Sublet had seen her too, but it only kicked him into some kind of motor-mouth ecstasy of religious dread. Every horror movie he'd ever seen trembling over Reverend Fallon's rants about witches, devil worshippers, and the living power of Satan. He'd gone through in his week's supply of gum, talking non-stop until Rydell finally told him to shut the fuck up. Because now she was gone. He wanted to think about her, how she'd looked, what she might have been doing there, and how it was she'd vanished. With Sublet sulking in shotgun seat, Rydell had tried to remember just exactly how she'd managed to so perfectly and suddenly not be there. And the funny thing was, he sort of remembered it in two ways, which was nothing at all like the way he still didn't really remember shooting Kenneth Turvey. Even though he'd heard production assistants and network lawyers go over it so many times, he felt like he'd seen it, or at least the Cops in Trouble version, which never aired. One way he remembered it, just sort of gone down the slope beside the road, though through whether she was running or floating, he couldn't say. The other way he remembered, she jumped through what was such a poor word for it, up the slope above the other side of the road, somehow clearing all that dust-silver moonlight vegetation and just flat-out impossible gone 40 feet if it was 5. And did Japanese women ever have that kind of long, curly hair? And it hadn't looked like the shadowed darkness of her bush had been shaved into something like an exclamation point. He'd wound up buying Sublet 4 packs of special gum at an all-night Russian pharmacy on Wilshire, amazed at what the stuff cost him. He'd seen other things, too, up the canyons, particularly when he'd drawn a shift on a deep graveyard, mostly fires, small ones where fires couldn't be, and lights in the sky, sometimes, but Sublet was so full of trailer camp contactee shit that if Rydell saw a light now driving, he knew better than to mention it. But sometimes, when he was up there, he'd think about her. He knew he didn't know what she was, and in some funny way he didn't care if she'd been human or not. But he hadn't ever felt like she was bad, just different. So now he just drove, shooting the shit with Sublet, on the night that would turn out to be his very last night on patrol with Insecure. No moon, but a rare clear sky with a few stars showing. 5 minutes to their first house check. Then they'd be swinging back towards Beverly Hills. They were talking about this chain of Japanese gyms called Body Hammer. Body Hammer didn't offer much in the way of traditional gym culture. In fact, they went as far as possible in the opposite direction, catering mostly to kids who liked the idea of being injected with Brazilian fetal tissue and having their skeletons reinforced with what the ads called performance materials. Sublet said it was the devil's work. Rydell said it was a Tokyo franchise operation. Gunhead said multiple homicide, hostage-taking in progress, may involve subscribers' minor children. Benedict Canyon, you have Insecure authorization to employ deadly, repeat deadly force. And the dash lit up like an old-time video arcade. The way it had worked out, Rydell hadn't actually had time to get used to Karen Mendelsohn, business class seats, or any of that stuff. Karen lived umpteen floors up in Century City 2, aka the Blob, which sort of looked like a streamlined, semi-transparent green tit, and was the 3rd tallest structure in LA basin. When the light was right, you could see almost clear through it, and make out 3 giant struts that held it up, each one so big around that you could stuff an ordinary skyscraper up it with room to spare. There were elevators up through these tripod things, and they ran at an angle. Rydell hadn't time to get used to that either. The tit had a carefully corroded copper nipple, like one of those Chinese hats that could have covered a couple football fields. That was where Karen's apartment was, under there, along with an equally pricey 100 others, a tennis club, bars and restaurants, and a mall you had to pay to join before you could shop there. She was right out on the edge, with big curved windows set into a green wall. Everything in there was different shades of white, except for her clothes, which were always black. Her suitcases were black too, and the big terry robes she liked to wear, which were the color of dry oatmeal. Karen said it was aggressive retro 70s, and she was getting a little tired of it. Rydell saw how she could be, but figured it might not be polite to say so. The network had gotten him a room in a West Hollywood hotel that looked more like a regular condo building, but he never did spend much time there. Until that Pookie Bear thing broke in Ohio, he'd mostly been up at Karen's. The discovery of the first 35 Pookie Bear victims pretty much paid Rydell's career as a cop in trouble. If it hadn't helped that officers who'd first reached the scene, Sergeant China Valdez and Corporal Norma Pierce, were easily the 2 best-looking women on the whole Cincinnati force. Balls out telegenic, one of the production assistants had said, though Rydell thought it sounded weird under the circumstances. Then the count began to rise, ultimately going right off any known or established serial killing scale. Then it was revealed that all the victims were children. Then Sergeant Valdez went post-traumatic in stone bug-fuck fashion,
walking into a downtown tavern and clipping both kneecaps off a known pedophile, this amazingly repulsive character, nicknamed Jelly Beans, who had absolutely no connection with the Pookie Bear murders. Aaron Pursley was already leering it back to Cincinnati on a plane that had no metal in it whatsoever. Karen had locked the goggles across her eyes and was talking non-stop to at least 6 people at once, and Rydell was sitting on the edge of her big white bed, starting to get the idea that something had changed. When she finally took the goggles off, she just sat there staring at a white painting on the white wall. "They got suspects?" Rydell asked. Karen looked over at him like she'd never seen him before. "Suspects? They've got confessions already." It struck Rydell how old she looked right then, and he wondered how old she actually was. She got up and walked out of the room. She came back 5 minutes later in a fresh black outfit. "Pack, I can't have you here now." Then she was gone. No kiss, no goodbye. And that was that. He got up, put a television on, and saw the Pookie Bear killer for the first time. All 3 of them. They looked, he thought, pretty much like everyone else, which was how people who do that kind of shit usually do look on television. He was sitting there in one of her oatmeal robes when a pair of rent-a-cops let themselves in without knocking. Their uniforms were black, and they were wearing the same kind of black high-top SWAT trainers that Rydell had worn on patrol in Knoxville. The ones with the Kevlar insoles in case somebody snuck up and tried to shoot you in the bottom of the foot. One of them was eating an apple. The other one had a stun stick in his hand. "Hey, pal," the first one said, around a mouthful of apple. "We gotta throw you out." "I had a pair of shoes like that," Rydell said. "Made in Portland, Oregon. $299 out at Costco." The one with the nightstick grinned. "You gonna get packing now?" So Rydell did, picking up anything that wasn't black, white, or oatmeal and tossing it into his blue Samsonite. The rent-a-cop with the stick watched him, while the other one wandered around finishing his apple. "Who you guys with?" Rydell asked. "Inten Secure," said the one with the stick. "Good outfit?" Rydell was zipping up his bag. The man shrugged. "Out of Singapore," the other one said, wrapping the core of his apple into a crumpled Kleenex he'd taken from his pants pocket. "We got all the big buildings, gated communities. Like that." He carefully tucked the apple core into the breast pocket of his crisp black uniform shirt behind the bronze badge. "You got money for the metro?" Mr. Stick asked Rydell. "Sure," Rydell said, thinking of his debit card. "Then you're better off than a majority of assholes we get to escort out of here," the man said. A day later, the network pulled the plug on his Mex-American bank card. That's the end of that section. All right, guys. That's not the end of the chapter, but the end of the chapter is... Okay, we can do it. Let's do it. Let's finish it. Hernandez might be wrong about English SWAT wagons, Rydell found himself thinking, punching Hotspur Husser into the 6-wheel overdrive and feeling gunheads suck down on pavement like a twin-engined 3-ton leech. He'd never really stomped on that thing before. Sublet yelped as the crash harness tightened automatically, yanking him up out of his usual slouch. Rydell slung Gunhead up onto the verge, covered in dusty ice plant, doing 70 past a museum-grade Bentley, and on the wrong side at that. Eye blink of a woman's passenger's horrified face. Then, Sublet must have managed to slap the red plastic plate that activated the strobes and the siren. Straight stretch now, no cars at all. Rydell straddled the center line and floored it. Sublet was making a weird keening sound that synced eerily with the rising ceramic whine of the twin Kyoceras,
and it came to Rydell that the Texan had snapped completely under the pressure of the thing, and was singing in some trailer park camp tongue known only to the benign followers of the Reverend Fallon. But no, when he glanced that way, he saw Sublet's lips moving frantically, scanning the client data as it seethed on the dash screens, his eyes bugging like the red-silver contacts might pop right out. But while he'd read, Rydell saw he was actually loading his worn-out second-hand Glock, his long white fingers moving in the most matter-of-fact way imaginable, as though he were making a sandwich or folding a newspaper. And that was scary. "Death Star!" Rydell yelled. It was Sublet's job to keep the bead in his ear at all times, listening for the satellite relayed, instantly overriding word of the real cops. Sublet turned, snapping the magazine into his Glock, his face so pale that it seemed to reflect the colors of the dash display as readily as did the blank steel rounds of his eyes. "The help's all dead," he said, "and they got 3 kids in the nursery." He sounded like he was talking about something mildly baffling he'd seen on the television, say a badly altered version of some old favorited film, drastically recast for some obscure ethnic market niche. "Say they're gonna kill him, Barry." "What the fuck the fucking cops say about it?" Rydell shouted, pounding on the padded figure-8 steering wheel in the purest rage of frustration he'd ever felt. Sublet touched a finger to his right ear. He looked like he was about to scream. "Down," he said. Gunhead's right front fender clipped off somebody's circa 1943 fully galvanized Sears rural route mailbox, no doubt acquired at great cost on Melrose Avenue. "They can't be fucking down," Rydell said. "They're the police." Sublet tugged the bead from his ear and offered it to Rydell. "Static's all." Rydell looked at his dash display. Gunhead's cursor was a green spear of destiny whipping along a paler green canyon road on a chaste white circle the size of a wedding ring. In the window immediately to the right he could read the vital signs data on the subscribers' 3 kids. Their pulse rates were up. In the window below there was a ridiculously peaceful-looking infrared frame of the subscriber's front gate. It looked solid. The readout said it was locked and armed. Right then, probably, was when he decided to just go for it. A week or so later, when it had all been sorted out, Hernandez was basically sympathetic about the whole thing. Not happy, mind you, because it had happened under his shift, but he did say he couldn't such blame Rydell under the circumstances. Inton Secure had brought the whole plane load of people from the head office in Singapore. Rydell heard to keep it all out of the media and work out some kind of settlement with the subscribers, the Schonbruns. He had no idea what that settlement might have finally amounted to, but he was just as happy to not know. And there was no such programs as Rent-A-Cops in trouble. The Schonbrun's front gate alone had probably been worth a couple dozen of his paychecks. Inton Secure could replace the gate, sure, because they'd installed it in the first place. It had been quite a gate, too, some kind of Japanese fiber-reinforced sheeting, thermoset to concrete, and it was hell had managed to get most of the wet honey sienna off Gunhead's front end. There was some damage to the house itself, mostly to the living room windows, which he'd driven through, and the furniture, which he'd driven over. But there had to be something for the Schonbruns on top of that, Hernandez explained. Something for the emotional pain, he said, pumping Rydell a cup of old nasty coffee from the big stainless thermos behind his desk. There was a fridge magnet on the thermos that said, "I'm not okay, you're not okay, but hey, that's okay." It was 2 weeks since the night in question, 10 in the morning, and Rydell was wearing a 5-day beard, a fine weave Panama Stetson, a pair of baggy, faded orange trunks, a Knoxville Police Department t-shirt that was starting to disintegrate at the shoulder seams, the black SWAT trainers from his Hinton secure uniform, and an inflated, transparent cast on his left arm. Emotional pain, Rydell said. Hernandez, who was nearly as wide as his desk, passed Rydell at the coffee. You way lucky, that's all I can say. I'm out of job, arm in a cast. I'm way lucky. Seriously, man, Hernandez said. You could have killed yourself. LAPD, they could have greased your ass down, dead. Mr. and Miss Schoenberg, they've been very nice about this, considering Miss Schoenberg's embarrassment and everything. Your arms got hassled? Hey, I'm sorry. Hernandez shrugged enormously. Anyway, you're not fired, ma'am. We can't let you drive now. You want to put us on gated residential? No problem. No thanks. Retail properties? You want to work evenings? Encino Fashion Mall? No. Hernandez narrowed his eyes. You seen the pussy over there? Nope. Hernandez sighed. Man, what happened with all that shit coming down on you in Nashville? Knoxville. Department came down for permanent suspension, going in without authorization or proper backup. And that bitch, one suing your ass. She and her son got caught sticking up a muffler shop in Johnson City last I heard of. Now it was Rydell's turn to shrug, except it made his shoulder hurt. See, Hernandez said, beaming. You lucky. In the instant of putting Gunhead through the Schoenberg's locked and armed Benedict Canyon gate, Rydell had experienced a fleeting awareness of something high, very pure, and quite clinically empty. The doing of the thing, the not thinking, that very weird adrenal exultation, and the losing of every more troublesome aspect of the self. And that, he later recalled remembering, as he'd fought the wheel, slashing through a Japanese garden across a patio and through a membrane of armored glass that gave away like something in a dream, had been a lot like what he'd felt as he'd drawn his gun and pulled the trigger, emptying into Kenneth Turvey's brain pan, and most copiously across a seemingly infinite expanse of white primered wallboard that nobody had ever bothered to paint. Rydell went over to Cedars to see Sublet. Hinton Secure sprung for a private cubicle. Better to keep Sublet away from any cruising minions of the media. The Texan was sitting up in bed, chewing gum, and watching a little liquid crystal disc player propped on his chest. Warlords of the 21st century, he said, when Rydell charged in. James Wainwright, Annie McEnroe, Michael Beck. Rydell grinned. When they make it. 1982, Sublet muted the audio and looked up. But I've seen it a couple times already. I've been over the shop seeing Hernandez, man. He says you don't have to worry about your job. Sublet looked at Rydell with his blank silver eyes. How about yours, Barry? Rydell's arm started to itch inside the inflated cast. He bent over and fished a plastic drinking straw from a little white wastebasket beside the bed. He poked the straw down the side of the cast and wiggled it around. It helped some. I'm history over there. They won't let me drive anymore. Sublet was looking at the straw. You should not to touch used stuff, not in the hospital. You don't have nothing contagious, Sublet. You're not one of the cleanest motherfuckers ever lived. You're about one of the cleanest motherfuckers ever lived. But what you gonna do, Barry? You gotta make a living, man. Rydell dropped the straw into the basket. Well, I don't know. But I know I don't want to do gated residential, and I don't want to do any malls. What about those hackers, Barry? Figure they'll get the ones set us up? Nope. Too many of them. Republic of Desire has been around for a while. Feds have a list of maybe 300 affiliates. There's no way to haul them all in, figure out who actually did it. Not unless one of them rats on somebody, which they tend to do on a pretty regular basis. How come they'd want to do that to us anyway? Hell, Sublet, how should I know? I just mean, Sublet said, well, that, for sure, and Hernandez says the LAPD told them they figured somebody wanted Miss Schoenbrunn caught more or less with her pants down. Neither Sublet nor Rydell had actually seen Miss Schoenbrunn because she was, as it turned out, in the nursery, although her kids weren't, having gone up to Washington State with their daddy to fly over the 3 newest volcanoes. Nothing that Gunhead had logged that night, since leaving the car wash, had been real. Someone had gotten into the Hotspur Hussar's onboard computer, plugged in a bunch of intricately crafted and utterly spurious data into the communications bundle, cutting Rydell and Sublet off from Inton Secure and the Death Star, which hadn't, of course, been down. Rydell figured a few of those good old Mongol boys at the car wash might know a little bit about that. And maybe, in that instant of weird clarity, with the gunhead's crumpled front end still trying to climb the shredded remains of a pair of big leather sofas, and with the memory of Kenneth Turvey's death finally real before him, Rydell had come to the conclusion that all the high crazy thing, that rush of going for it, was maybe something that wasn't always entirely to be trusted. "But man," Sublet said, as if to himself, "they gonna kill those little babies." And with that, he'd snapped the harness open and was out of there, Glock in his hand, before Rydell could do anything at all. Rydell had him shut the siren and the strobes off a block away, but surely anyone in the house was now aware that Inton Secure had arrived. "Responding," Rydell heard himself say, slapping a holstered Glock into his uniform and grabbing his chunker, which aside from its rate of fire was probably the best thing for a shootout in a nursery full of kids. He kicked the door open and jumped out, his trainers going straight through the inch-thick glass top of a coffee table. Needed 12 stitches, but it wasn't that deep. He couldn't see Sublet. He stumbled forward, cradling the yellow bulk of the chunker, vaguely aware that there was something wrong with his arm. "Freeze, cocksucker!" said the biggest voice in the world. "LAPD! Drop that shit or we'll blow your ass away!" Rydell found himself the focus of an abrupt and extraordinary painful radiance, a light so bright that it fell into his uncomprehending eyes like hot metal. "You hear me, cocksucker?" Wincing, fingers across his eyes, Rydell turned and saw the bulbous armored nacelles of the descending gunship. The downdraft was flattening everything in the Japanese garden that the gunhead hadn't already taken care of. Rydell dropped the chunker. "The pistol too, asshole!" Rydell grabbed the Glock's handle between the thumb and forefinger. It came away in its plastic holder, with a tiny but distinct scritch of Velcro, somehow audible through the drumming of the helicopter's combat-muffled engine. He dropped the Glock and raised his arms, or tried to. The left one was broken. They found Sublet 15 feet from the gunhead. His face and hands were swelling like bright pink toy balloons, and it seemed he was suffocating. Schumbrun's Bosnian housekeeper having employed a product that contained xylene and chlorinated hydrocarbons to clean some crayon marks off a bleach-oaked end table. "What the fuck's wrong with him?" asked one of the cops. "He's got allergies," Rydell said through gritted teeth. They cuffed his hands behind his back, and it hurt like hell. "You gotta get him to emergency." Sublet opened his eyes, or tried to. "Barry." Rydell remembered the name of the movie he'd seen on television. "Miracle Mile," he said. Sublet squinted up at him. "Never seen it," Sublet said, and fainted. Miss Schoenbrunn had been entertaining her Polish landscape gardener that evening. The cops found her in the nursery, Angered beyond speech, she was cinched quite interestingly up in a couple of $1,000 worth of English latex, North Beach leather, and a pair of vintage Smith & Wesson handcuffs that someone had paid to have lovingly buffed and redone in black and chrome. The gardener, evidently, headed for the hills when he heard Rydell's porking gunhead in the living room. The next chapter is called Not a Nice Party. That is the end of chapter 2.